Hello and welcome back to the second part of my video series on automating SharePoint Online with System Center Orchestrator. My name is Richard Green. I am a senior technical consultant for Imprint Consulting in the UK. You can follow me on Twitter at Richard J. Green, or you can check out my blog at richardjgreen.net. In this second part of the video series, I'll be taking you through some of the configuration work that's required in Orchestrator and showing how we've pieced together the Runbooks to allow all of this to happen. So here we are on our Orchestrator management server with our Orchestrator Runbook Designer application open. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we've got quite a few integration packs installed on this environment. And included in there, we've got the Microsoft SharePoint integration pack installed. Now, obviously, I know I said earlier on in the video that the SharePoint Online integration pack for Orchestrator doesn't actually offer some of the stuff that we need to be able to implement this. But I just wanted to show you that is the case. So if we crack open this integration pack, we can see that there's quite a few things here. However, all of the things that are here are really kind of user-centric activities, like creating list items, uploading and downloading attachments to document libraries, and various other things like that. Now, with this implementation to automate SharePoint Online, we're not looking to perform these user-centric activities. We're actually looking to perform administrative activities, being able to create sites, being able to configure settings on those sites. So that's why we've had to resort to using the SharePoint Online PowerShell commandlets and making calls into the SharePoint.NET client to do that. So let's have a look at what we've got to make this work. So on our Orchestrator server, we've configured a set of variables. And these variables that we can see here are going to be used throughout the Runbook. And these variables define things that are constant within the environment that we don't want to prompt the user for every time someone tries to initiate a Runbook via Service Manager or through the orchestration console for that matter. So the primary things that we have here is the UPN or the formatted email address of the user that we're going to be using to authenticate SharePoint Online and the password that goes with that. We've also got the URLs for the SharePoint sites that we want to be able to connect to. We've got a few other settings which are a little bit more specific to some of the sort of subcomponents of the Runbooks, such as the site template and the names of some SharePoint groups and lists within SharePoint. Now, you'll notice that the SharePoint admin password variable that we have here is starred out, and that is because in Orchestrator we've set this to be an encrypted value so that it's not shown in plain text in the console and when it's being used in the Runbooks. Now, the UPN or the format email address that you're using for connecting to SharePoint, there's a few considerations with this. We need to make sure that the account that we're using is an Office 365 tenant administrator, so that account has the proper privileges to be allowed to connect to SharePoint Online via PowerShell. In addition to that, we need to make sure that that user is a site collection administrator in SharePoint Online for any site collections where you want to create new sites or perform changes to the environment. So now taking a look at the Runbooks that we've got to make this work, we expand the folder where we're storing our Runbooks. You'll see here that we have a number of Runbooks, and what we're using here is what's commonly referred to as the command and control method for using Orchestrator. So we have what's known as a parent Runbook, and that parent Runbook then will initiate child Runbooks to perform individual activities. So the parent Runbook itself doesn't actually connect to SharePoint Online and do any of the activities that we want to perform these tasks. This is purely just to initiate smaller subsets of activity. And the reason we do this is for a couple of reasons. So firstly, we do this because it makes it easier for troubleshooting, so that if something goes wrong with the creation of a site, we can look at the parent runbook output and we can look at what went wrong, and we can see exactly at what step it went wrong. So if, for example, in the instance that we've got here, let's assume that the creation of a site went wrong at the test subsite URL phase, we can be pretty certain that something went wrong during the create new subsite phase previously. The second reason that we design this parent runbook like this is it allows for us to reuse code where possible. So if in 2 or 3 months' time we decide that we'd like to be able to create a different kind of site in SharePoint Online, maybe with some slightly different attributes or some slightly different configuration, then what we can do is we can take these child runbooks and we can perhaps only use a couple of them, or we can perhaps do things in a slightly different order, passing in different variables, and that's going to make it a lot easier for us to adapt how we're working to new challenges. So first off, I'm going to show you how the runbook is initiated with the initialize data runbook control activity. Now, if we open this up, we can see here that when this runbook is initiated, we're going to collect a number of details from the person either initiating this via the orchestration console or through Service Manager and the self-service portal. And the information that we're going to collect is the essential information that we need to be able to create the site. So we're going to be collecting the title, the description, and the URL that the person would like to use for the site. Now, in some scenarios, you might choose to not collect the URL or not collect the title, and you could have the title and the URL to match. But obviously, with SharePoint, what we're able to do is we're able to have a different title to a URL. So let's say, for example, we were creating a site called Test Site. We might want the title of the site to be Test Space Site. But with web addresses, we don't really want to put spaces in there. Otherwise, we're going to end up with lots of %20s in our URLs, which doesn't look very user-friendly. The contributor users, the owner users, and the reader users details that we're going to collect from the users initiating the runbook will be used to populate the SharePoint groups that are created against the new site to allocate and assign permissions for people to be able to access that site. So now that we know the data that we're going to collect as part of starting the runbook, let's have a look at what happens when we start the runbook. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to initiate this runbook here, create new subsite. Now, if we open up our child runbook here, we can see that create new subsite is a pretty simple looking runbook that just runs a single .NET script activity. And this theme flows through all of the child runbooks that we have here, because we're using the PowerShell commandlets and the SharePoint.NET client runtime to connect to SharePoint Online. Everything that we're doing is in PowerShell. And because of the way we've compartmentalized all of our activities into small child runbooks, it keeps each child runbook very simple. So on the child runbook here, we've got an initialize data step. And most of the details that we're collecting here are the same as the details that we collect on the parent runbook. And these details will then be passed through from the parent runbook to the child. The exception is there's a few additional details that we collect, which is specifically details for the connection to SharePoint Online. And those are the details that we're going to retrieve from those global variables that we've stored inside Orchestrator so that we don't have to keep re-entering them. Now, as we can see here, we're using language of SharePoint in this .NET activity, and we've got a nice looking little SharePoint. We've got a nice looking little PowerShell script here that's going to run, and what that script is going to do is it's going to connect to SharePoint Online, and it's going to create a subsite using all of the details that are provided through the initialized data activity of this Runbook. And when it's finished, it's either going to follow the site created OK or the site creation failed path based on the output of the PowerShell command list that we run. And that will then determine the flow through the remainder of the Runbook. Now, I'm not going to show you each and every one of these because they all work in much the same way with just a single .NET activity. But you can see how all of these build on each other when we go through. So in the first instance, obviously, we need to create a site. So we will do that here. Once the site's been created, we're going to invoke a second Runbook, which will then connect to SharePoint Online and try to open the subsite. And this is where we test that the URL was used correctly from the data that we collected at the beginning. And we verify that the connection to SharePoint Online in the first instance was good and that the site was created. Once we've verified that the site is online and OK, we're then going to move on to the next activity, which for us is to disable the site inheritance. It's quite common for SharePoint sites to have their inheritance disabled, especially when we get down to the lower levels, because a site collection or a top-level site, typically everybody will have read access to that, and only the administrators will have perhaps like full control or design permissions, because we want to keep that top-level site just as a navigation hub. Then our subsites is where our users are actually going to be storing content and interacting with SharePoint. So we want to make sure that the right people have got the right level of access to those sites. And more importantly, we want to make sure that people who don't need to have access to those sites don't. So this is a simple one that just breaks the inheritance on the site. Once we've broken the inheritance on the site, we're able to then work with the unique permissions on that site. So what we do in the next activity is we create groups using SharePoint groups on that site. And the group names are configured automatically for us by the Runbook based on the data that we input at the start, based on the site name, so that we've got consistently named groups throughout the environment. Once our groups have been created, we'll then move to add users to those groups using the 3 pieces of data we collected at the start for users who will be owners, contributors, and readers, sometimes called visitors in SharePoint. Once we've done that, we know then that our site is set up for the right level of access. So we're now happy to add the site to our SharePoint navigation so that people can find the site. And that's what we'll do here in this next child Runbook. We invoke the inherit top navigation Runbook, and what this will do is connect to the subsite, and it will change the navigation on it to inherit the navigation links from its parent, so that we get the consistent look and feel between the top level site and the parent and the child sites. Now, the customer that we were working with in this specific instance uses a promoted links list from their top level site, and those promoted links then have unique permissions applied to them to provide an audiencing effect, so that when users connect to the site collection with their browser, they'll see a nice interface with a list of tiles that will present to them sites that are available to them, with the permissions that they have. So what we need to do is next, we need to add a list item to that promoted links list. And that's what we do here, using, again, the PowerShell command list to connect to SharePoint Online. Now, list items by default will inherit their permissions from the list. So once we've created our list item, we need to break the permissions on that and set some unique permissions. Now, this is to provide our audience in effect so that the only people who will see that promoted link are people with the appropriate permissions to access that site. Now, this is great because it means that when a user connects to SharePoint and they see this promoted links list, there's no feeling of false sense of security. It's quite common, perhaps in like file server environments, for users to connect to shares and see a big list of folders, but to then find that they can maybe only actually access 3 or 4 of those folders in that big list. So this gets around that issue. Once we've worked through all the child runbooks, we reach the final stage, which is the return data activity, runbook control activity. And this marks the end of our runbook. Thank you very much for watching. In the next part of the video, we'll look into how you can configure Service Manager to present the runbooks from this video to end users via the self-service portal. If you have any questions or you'd like more information, then please feel free to contact me via Twitter at Richard J. Green. You can check out my blog at richardjgreen.net. Or for more information on the work that Infront do, you can look at the Infront website at infrontconsulting.com. Thank you. Bye-bye.